it was just so toxic. And I mean, there was, infidelity, there was like domestic abuse, just so much. And so if we can make it, it's just really an encouragement, that if people like us can make it, like anybody can make it.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Prophets Platform. My name is Jacob, and I'm your host for today. Today is our marriage edition. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so you know when the next video drops. So I have my lovely wife here, Jessica Alvarado, and we have Paul and Gabby, and we're going to do our marriage edition podcast. So we're going to get a little raw and real with our audience. So I want to thank you guys for being on the podcast, and it's been a little while that we've been trying to get you guys on.
Yep.
We're on this side today.
Yeah.
It's a little weird.
You guys are usually behind the scenes.
Always behind the scenes.
And now we're going to get you right in front of the camera and let the world see who Paul and Gabby are.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Right. Do I do like The Rock and give that smoldering look?
Yeah.
Or like Zoolander? No, I'm just kidding.
Who are you giving that look to?
You baby.
Okay.
It's going to get real.
And so we'll just get into so we just met you guys. We're coming up on a year, right?
No, man.
It's not
Less?
I think I met you in February, March, April.
Okay.
3 months before the ACU event.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Okay.
It seems like we've known each other forever.
Yeah.
A long
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kindred spirits.
Yeah, six whole months.
I shared my vision with you, and the next thing you know, we're on the football field, and
Right.
we have a bunch of people coming together.
He came home so excited when he met you. He's like, "Oh my gosh!" Like he met his soulmate. He's like, "This dude is awesome." He wouldn't stop talking about you. Yeah, he's like, "You got to meet him."
And then I was like, we're going to do something big. And then, yeah, we did. And it was awesome.
It was love at first sight.
Yeah.
So so talking about love at first sight, how did you guys meet?
Oh my goodness. Okay. The real true Hollywood story. All right. So I was driving home from a local establishment in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
A bar,
A bar. Yeah. It was called the Fox End.
hound.
And I turned me and my buddy Joe Gutierrez, we were played rock, paper, scissors because we were both intoxicated at the moment. And I lost, so I had to drive. And pulled up to a red light, and I was like, oh my goodness, look at that girl. She's beautiful. She's hot. And he goes, don't talk to her. There's a little boy, or there's a man in the back seat sleeping. I said, no, there's not. And I asked her, I said, hey, roll down the window. And I told her, hey, is your little boy, is he sleeping?
So on my end, I just see this dude just driving by making hand signals. And I'm like, what? Is there something going on with my car? Something wrong with my tire? And he's like doing signs. And I'm like, roll down my window. And normally when guys would be like, oh, hey, babe, I'd be like, whatever. But this guy's like hand signaling me. I don't know what he said. He said something funny. And then he's like, is your little boy in the backseat asleep? And I'm like, so random. I was like, no.
Yeah.
And so we met at a traffic light.
So we met at a traffic light. She yelled out the easiest number in the world, 555-55-5555. That's how easy her phone number is.
That's
So-
not my phone number.
That's not her number, but it was that
That's
easy.
what it
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like to you.
Disclaimer, that's not her number. Don't be calling it, boys.
Well,
she gave
So
me a
he's
number.
like, he's funny. So he's sitting there talking. I mean, and this is like us driving to the red light and just chit chatting. And I don't know, he was just making me laugh. And he's like, hey, what's your phone number? And so I wanted to give him the wrong phone number, but I'm a very bad liar. And so the right number just kept coming out of my mouth. And I'm like, the next number, tell him the wrong number, the next number. And by the time you know it, I gave him my number. And I was like, oh, he didn't get it. And the light turned green. And I was like, ha, ha, bye. I took off. And then wouldn't you know it, my phone rings. And I'm like, no way. And so I picked up my phone. And he's like, I just wanted to make sure you didn't give me the wrong number. I'm like, well, I tried, but I couldn't think, of a wrong number fast enough. And so that's how we met. We ended up talking on the phone for like 3 months before we went out and did anything else.
Yeah.
And then so the first night we went out, and so I had commitment issues. Like I was so afraid of relationships and commitments. And so I agreed to go out with him, at the club. And I thought to myself, if I don't like him, I could just dance my way away. And so we met at the club, and we had a fun night. It was like super fun, him and his whole entourage of guys. And so we had a great time. And then he asked me out again. And now the story he likes to tell is because the first night we went out clubbing, it was on Halloween.
Yeah.
And so
the story goes this way. She goes, now remember, guys, I met her at a stoplight. So I only saw her face,
while intoxicated.
And I was drunk.
For like a couple minutes.
I was drunk. So you think about it, I'm talking to this girl on the phone for months. And, I'm like, man, and then back then we didn't have the technology we have nowadays.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was flip phones. It was one of those Star Techs. Mm-hmm. And so, so it was like, no picture or nothing. She wouldn't want to see me. She wouldn't tell me where she worked, nothing really. So we finally get together and all that. And then she goes, I'm going to be dressed as the devil. So that night at the club, everybody's walking in and every girl's dressed like the devil.
Oh.
Yeah, and she's all, I'll be wearing horns and a tail. And I was like, whoa. And, normally people would run from that. I grew up in a good Christian home, No.
While he's clubbing.
Well, I'm clubbing, you know what I mean? And, nope. And then I was like, yep, that's her, because she said she was going to be with one of her guy friends.
He was my best friend at the time.
Yeah, so she has a lot of guy friends. God's put a wonderful connection of men in her life. And she was with him with Dan, and I was like, oh, that's her. And then, so it was a good night that night. And then she'll tell you about the second night.
So, we had fun that night. The second night, he was like, hey, let's go out again. So we met up at the club again. But this time he was like super intoxicated, super obnoxious. And so I had to pick him up and drop him off at home. And so he dragged me out of the club because he was fighting. He was always fighting. And so he dragged me out of the club, and I was mad. I'm like, I love to dance. I'm like, God, don't be dragging me out of the club. Like, you didn't even ask me. And so he was going to grab a taxi, and I was like, go ahead, take your taxi. I'm out of here. And so he jumps in the taxi cab and jumps out and comes running after me. He's like, okay. He's like, just take me home. And the whole way home, he fought with himself. And back then, when I would get really upset, I would just shut down, just get really quiet. And so he's like, well, say something. Call me an a-hole. Like, say something. Yeah. And I was just like, oh, my gosh, I can't wait to drop this dude off. And then he would be like, okay. I'm sorry. Just pick me. And then a minute later, okay, well, say something. Like, don't just sit there quietly. Like, say something. Like, just the whole way he like just yelled at himself. And so finally we get to his house, and right before he opens the door and right before he gets out, he's like, so what? Are you going to kiss me or what? I'm like, get the heck out of my car.
So a little dysfunction from the beginning?
A lot of dysfunction, yeah.
A whole lot of dysfunction.
Yeah. So after that, I was like, you know what? I just don't need this in my life. He was so arrogant and so he had a lot of anger problems. And I was like, I just don't want to deal with this. And so I stopped talking to him. Like, I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to really be around him. And the funny thing is I just kept running into him. Mm-hmm. So everywhere I would go, there he was. And so finally one day he was like, so can I call you? And I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, you can call me. Don't call me. It doesn't bother me. And so he started calling me.
Exactly how she said it too.
And so he started calling me again. And so we just became friends. Yeah. And so it was like 9 months where we were just friends but I wouldn't go out with him. And so it became a thing because he would travel a lot for work. And so he was around his coworkers a lot. And it became a thing where his coworkers would be like, hey, it's Thursday, call Gabby. And so every Thursday he would be like, hey, you want to go out? And I'd be like, no, thanks, I'm good. And so every Thursday it just became a joke, like, hey, call Gabby, ask her out.
Yeah. And then it finally happened. My friend Mike, it was his birthday. And it's funny because his birthday is April 23rd, and that's the same day that we got married was April 23rd.
Oh, okay.
No, not on purpose. It just happened.
It just happened that way. And Mikey's like, Gabby, you're going with us, and I'm not taking no for an answer. It's my birthday. Mm-hmm. You're going with us. And then we all went out. It was my mom, my dad, all of us, like the whole family, his family. It was a big old huge birthday party at a restaurant. she came and
Yeah. Well,
that-
honestly, I finally like gave in, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna like just be boring and make him have a bad time, so he just leaves me alone and like doesn't bother me again. And so I just went in with that mindset of just letting him have like a bad time, so he'll never ask me out again. And he was a different Paul that night. Like, he wasn't drinking. He was a total gentleman. He was going back to church, and so he was opening doors. And I'm like, oh man, this dude's got potential. And so from that day forward, we've been together since that day.
So how long you guys been together now?
About 20 years now.
Oh, damn.
but,
awesome.
But dun dun dun, it all fell apart. The mask came off. You know, the Christianese mask.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're going to talk about today. You know, like, you know, and I see it a lot nowadays, especially working with the men's groups that we work with and stuff, is that we put on this mask to get what we want. And I put that mask on, and at the
He
time,
gave me a false resume.
no,
Right.
and at the time though, I really was really legitly seeking God. I really was, but there's that that little thing in the background, you know, and people always say, "Oh yeah, the club life and all this and that." No, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the drinking. I enjoyed going out to the clubs with her. Like, man, we enjoyed it. We had a good time, and you know, but now that we matured, it's like, oh my goodness. And it's funny because Pastor Mike was talking about that this morning, is sometimes you're not able to relate to somebody unless you speak their language,
Yeah.
right? So when these young people are telling me, man, I'm having a good time, like the kid I talked to last night outside, there was a kid outside of our worship event last night, and I gave him, I went outside and he was praying. And I said, all right, how old are you? And he said, 18. And he goes, so what do you want? And he goes, I want to get off the streets. So I said, okay, I could take you to these 3 different locations. I could take you to Victory Outreach here, Teen Challenge, and Redeeming Hope over here. I said, there's 3 different organizations we could take you to tonight if you really want to get off the street. And he said no. So it was like, okay, you were just praying. We brought you a cruise ship. We could take you to any of these locations. But I guess that's where we're at right now, is that we have to be able to speak the language that people understand and give them the kind of hope they want. But you can't give them a lifeline if they don't want it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, people don't change if they don't want to change.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what happened with us, and that's the advice that I always give, especially, you know, new couples, is make sure your foundations are strong with the Lord first before, you know, you plunge into marriage and these relationships, because we moved in together, you know, and I wasn't a Christian then. He knew better, you know, and so we ended up moving in together shortly after that. But we both were trying to go to church. I was trying to seek, you know, who the Lord was. I was starting to go to church. I wasn't necessarily a Christian at that point, but I was trying to get into that, you know, to get to know who God was. And when I give advice to people, I'm like, if I can go back and do it all over again, I still believe Paul is the person God had for me, but I would have waited. I would have waited until his relationship was strong with the Lord, and so was mine. And I think that would have avoided a lot of the heartaches that came after that. And because we were 2 broken people with so much baggage, we had so much unhealed wounds and unhealed hurt, that when we came together, we just meshed all of the toxic together. And instead of helping each other up, we like really tore each other down.
I think that's more common than I mean, even when Jess and I we did premarital counseling, and I often think, though, regardless of how much premarital counseling and how much you know someone,
That's true.
once you start living with
Yeah.
them
Oh,
and
yeah.
really becoming one, I think the gloves come on, and it's like
That's true.
Yeah.
it's like everything starts coming out
Yeah.
to the surface.
Well, that's what the Lord had showed me like many years ago, is like we're all like little tea bags, right? We don't even know what's inside of us until we're put in hot water,
Right, right.
and then it
Yes.
comes out.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I know a lot that came out when we were in counseling
Oh, yeah.
because
You
we
find
were
out-
blended family.
Right.
Yeah.
You find out a lot more about each other on a deeper level than you ever knew.
Even about yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did our counselor say, that you were my mirror?
Absolutely.
It's true.
Yeah.
I was sharing this with our men's group the other day, and we were talking about change, and change only starts when you're willing to change, and but until you realize that you need to change the language,
Right.
you don't think it's necessary. And so we were sitting down with our counselor, and he's sitting down across from us, and I'm paying like what was it, like $75 an hour every week, and we're sitting down with this guy. And every time we sat down, he said not one word to Jess. He just kept looking at me and just kept talking to me. And finally,
Like, who's this therapist?
yeah, I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, and I'm thinking it's Jess. Like, I'm thinking it's all you. and he just keeps talking to me, and I'm like, what the heck?
Right.
Like, what is this guy? And then finally, I was like, okay, there's two of us in this room. You keep talking to me. Like, are you going to address any of the issues that she's displaying? And he said, he goes, are you or are you not the man of your house?
Wow.
And I was like, and I was like, yes. And then he was like, are you or are you not the spiritual covering over your wife? And I was like, well, yeah. And he said, are you or are you not stronger physically and spiritually, mentally than your wife? And I was like, I didn't want to say no, like, yes. And he said, so everything that I'm telling you is on the weight of your shoulders, and your wife is receiving everything. And he's like, she's your mirror. She is the way she is because you are the way that you are.
Yeah.
And he goes, and when you're willing to change, she'll change. And I'm like, oh man.
That's so funny because I would use that line from I think it's the Titans.
The Kraken. Here comes the
What is that
Kraken.
movie? What is it? The football team.
Remember the Titans?
Remember
the
the
Titans.
Titans, yeah. And how, when they were fighting on camp, and he's like, well, leader, or what did he say, coach? Or what was he, team captain? I'm like just a reflection of you,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And so I
Yeah,
used
she
that.
told me that a lot.
Yeah.
I'm only a reflection of your leadership. Yeah, that one's quoted pretty good around our household.
Yeah.
And then now my daughter uses it against
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Oh,
Right.
dang.
I'm your
Oh,
mirror.
true.
I'm your mirror,
She's a
mama.
little me.
She
Yeah.
is a mini her.
No, but it's true. I remember reading a book called We're God's Mirror, and it was talking about how God is the image, and we're supposed to be the reflection. And then when that counselor was talking about our wives are our reflection, it made a lot of sense. Whatever negative is in us is coming out. Whatever is positive is coming out. And if we don't change, then nothing else in the dynamics changes.
Yeah. And as like a super strong woman that I am, and independent woman, especially like with a lot of the feminist movement that is happening nowadays, one of the things that, my encouragement for men is, there's no blame shifting, right? We all have our part that we need to work on, but I do try to encourage the men, that we can change the world if men just rise up. Because as stubborn as I am, as independent as I am, when my husband rises up and he's a reflection of Christ, it makes me just want to submit. And so the word submission is such a bad word nowadays in the circle of women,
Yeah.
But it's also been misused, in the way the church has used it, or men, and so it makes women cringe sometimes. But I'm like, but when my husband's that reflection of Christ, like, it just makes me want to submit. And I'm like, shoot, I don't want to like take on all these burdens. Here you go. Those are yours,
Yeah.
and it just kind of frees a lot off my shoulders as well. And so
Yeah.
I freely like just want to submit.
Right. I agree with that too. And it's an attraction
It is.
when they step up and take place of of where God has them and wants them in a foundation and in a family. For me, it's very attractive to watch it.
Yes.
And then I do want to listen and to obey his place.
Unless we're driving. if I'm driving,
I'm a good co-driver.
stop here, slow down, turn there. Why'd you park there? It's like when I'm driving by myself, I never have an argument with myself about where I'm parking. Like
Right.
what's going on with that?
Well, it's not fun then if I'm not there with you.
He just misses all the exits.
Yeah.
He's good at that too.
Well,
I'm not paying attention. I'm just talking. 2 exits ago, she was like, "Are you gonna get off the freeway here?"
well, this is how smart we are as men, right? Because our son, I remember one day, man, our son was already like 16 at the time. I said, "Hey, son, go down there and go get me." I told him to get something out of the glove box, and all of a sudden I hear the trunk open, right? And then I hear the trunk close, and then I hear him shuffling around in the car, and then he comes back up, And I said, "Did you look in the glove box?" And he looks at me, straight face. He didn't know what the freaking glove box was.
He's a super
dang.
smart
And
kid.
he's smart, son. I love you. And
Where's the glove compartment?
I said, where's the glove department? I don't know. And I was all right there in the dash where they
Right,
keep the
yeah.
gloves. But it's funny because men, we're the glove department, right? We're empty. We got a nothing box. Believe it or not, ladies, we don't think about nothing. And
story.
women are the GPS. I always joke
Rerouting.
around. Rerouting. My wife comes with the built-in pointer. You know what I mean? Your GPS doesn't have a pointer, but this one's got a pointer all over her, you know? And yeah.
I don't
she's
say
on-
anything. I just point.
She just points, you know? Or she'll lean over and she'll hit the cruise control for me, you know what I mean? And she's all, are
Because he
you
goes into his nothing box, and all of a sudden we're on the freeway and we're doing like 40 miles an hour. So I'm all trying to speed up on the cruise control.
she's all, are you back? And I'm like, yeah, where was I? So, you know? But Jacob knows we got a nothing box. You
Oh,
know?
yeah.
We just zone out, you
Yep.
know? So
Yeah.
That is so funny.
Yeah, it's funny. But no, and then we'll get a little Christianese because I was thinking about it a minute ago because she's the water and I'm the wine, you know, because I'm a built-in whiner. I've been a complainer my whole life,
Oh.
you know, and it's funny because we were talking about being transparent on this podcast, and I've been telling her this for the last, probably about 3 months, I had to get out of my whining and complaining because my mom was a big complainer and big whiner, you know. I love her, but she did complain a lot, you know, and it just like rubbed off on me, you know, because I wasn't a daddy's boy. I was a mama's boy, you know. We would watch all our shows together and all that, you know, and but I
Manny's
had
petties.
to, yeah. So, you know, I'm not going rock climbing. I'm getting a pedicure. You
Yeah.
know, like, yeah,
True story.
you might. I still whoop you up, but you know what I mean. I'm gonna do it in style.
With
you
your,
know?
with your hands done.
Yeah, I'm gonna be like McGregor walking in. I'm gonna be looking sharp. But that's where we're at now. Is I'm like, and I even tell her because we'll get into scuffles like, because we're both alphas, you know, and I always do that. I beat my chest all the time just to show her dominance. But it's one of those things where I was telling God, I was like, okay, God, I need to be teachable. And now I tell her that. And like almost every day I'll be like, I learned a lesson today, you know, because we were talking about my wild imagination because I could imagine things. I could see them. Like when me and Jacob met 6 months ago, he told me his vision, and 3 months later, he's up on stage preaching. And this afternoon we had lunch with one of the guys got saved at the ACU event.
Oh yeah. That's
You know,
cool.
so what you saw, what you told me, I saw it already. I could see it in a vision. So I let God did give us imagination. And don't ever take that away, because if your kids have imaginations and you're like, why is this kid so hyper and have an imagination? God gave us those imaginations. He gave us that look at Walt Disney, what he built. And now look at what it's become, because it's the second generation that's destroying it, and the third generation are perverting Disney. You know, so we have to use that, and that's what I'm just asking God. I'm like, okay, teach me today, Lord. What is the lesson for today? You know,
Often too, I see that we're opposites attract.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even though, like you're saying, you guys are both alphas. Like Jess was definitely like a very strong, independent,
Yeah. Single parent. when we
single
got together.
parent. Yeah, and so mixing, you know, two individuals that are very strong together and becoming. I mean, marriage, I think, is meant to kill you.
Oh yeah.
So that.
Two is better than one, honey.
Yeah. You gotta die to yourself to make it work.
right.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to put your spouse first.
I think that's been our lesson this last year, right? Is about really being selfless instead of playing the tug of war, because we've been playing tug of war for all these years. And it's just really about that selflessness to each other. It makes you want to be selfless, you know, when your spouse is doing that for you, and it's better. But I mean, we've been together for 20 years, but it's really just been this last year where there's just been this, it's been a good marriage.
Yeah.
You know, because before that, it was that we made it this far. That's just really God's grace, just God's hand on us. It was just so toxic. And I mean, there was, you know, infidelity, there was like domestic abuse, you know, just so much. And so if we can make it, you know, it's just really an encouragement, you know, that if people like us can make it, like anybody can make it. It's just really putting God first, you know, the foundation. And it does take two people. So you have to have two willing people wanting to make it work. Sometimes one person does do a little bit more work than the other at times, you know. There was a time where, you know, it was just me putting in most of the effort. And then the tables turned, you know, and then it was just all Paul. And I was like dealing with my anger, you know, and I was like so angry and so hurt that I was just like, I just had given up. And so he had to pick up and really just do the work. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't have made it, you know.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I think that's what you're, like you said, it's a toxicity that goes on in a marriage, you know?
Yeah.
And because she was the one every morning, she would get up early and be out in the living room praying. And then when we get in a fight, I would kick her. Well, you know what I mean? I'd be like, I would make fun of her and be like, oh yeah, you're praying to God again. And like, just always just on her about her relationship with the Lord, you know? And then all of a sudden I started getting closer to God. And then all of a sudden it felt like she was falling away. And then and then she even told me one day, see, how do you feel? How does it feel? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I did that to you for how many years? Did I beat you up about your Christianity? Now I'm following God. I'm all passionate about this and that. And she's like, yeah, I was passionate too, remember? And I was like, whoa. But now these last few, you know, like honestly, these last 6 months since we started putting that ACU event together, and she told me, she goes, you go do it, because I've always relied on her. And she goes, you go do it. And then she paid us a compliment too, Jacob. She did.
Yeah.
And she said, she goes, I watched you, and you and Jacob put this stuff all together. You guys made this vision a reality. And I was like, whoa, we did. You know what I mean? Like with God's help and all of you guys that helped us out there. If we haven't told you thank you, I say sincerely for me and Jacob, Jess, Gabby, we thank you for all the help, the support, all the donations that you guys gave.
Yeah.
It doesn't go unseen. And I'm sorry if you lost my phone number or whatever, please reach out to us on this and contact us, because we love you guys to be part of this ministry that we're building and God's putting together. He's uniting us. And,
Yeah.
you know.
And I'm grateful for Jess, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to do half the stuff I'm doing too.
We're a team.
Yeah.
How long have you guys been together?
We've been together for 9 years.
Wow.
We've been married for like almost 7.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know how you guys met, but you guys want to go into that?
We both swiped right on Tinder.
Tinder.
Dun, 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 dun.
It is what you make it. But
Were you guys
subscribe
Christians
to
at the
Tinder.
time?
Yeah.
Both of you? Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
both Christians. We were both single parents, both strong, independent people who made it being single parents. And yeah, we both swiped right. And I took about 3 to 4 weeks before we actually met, because I was not going to let a man into my son's life unless it was something that was going to be worth waiting for. And that's exactly what we did. And so, yeah, we went out on a couple dates.
We did start living together though pretty early,
Yeah.
Oh.
and just jumped that and didn't do that right. But
Right. I felt guilty because I was getting him out of the ghetto when his lease was up at his old apartment. And I'm like, you got to get the heck out of here.
I was living on like Thomas and
The ghetto.
You're living in the hood.
In the hood.
Cinderfella.
So, yeah, he came and he did. Yep. He moved in, which is something I think we would not have done.
Yeah.
But yeah, came in and blended our families together when our kids were preteen,
That was difficult.
preteen age.
That was really difficult.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't always following the Lord. Like I had to always take my daughter to church on Sundays, but I was always working 2 jobs, was never around, going out and partying on the weekends. And so when Jess and I met, it was really when I started to change. And then my daughter had seen a lot of the wildness, especially with her family, and then we were like developing our family, and then it got bad, just the whole blended family issue.
Did the kids accept each other or you guys?
Vince did, and my daughter had a lot of issues that needed to be addressed, and then we weren't equipped to handle any of all that because we were just trying to figure out how do we make this marriage work, you know.
So we were definitely very grateful to have healthy relationships with friends that were strong marriages who had walked what we were going through, blending families and having marriage groups that we were connected with. If it wasn't for that and if it wasn't for counseling, we probably would not be together today. So we were poured into with people that were not from worldly views, but were from Christian views and values that were like, you got to get through this. You got to figure it out. And that's exactly what we did. And so, yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that was that helped us was our marriage group.
Yes.
And they got us connected to our counselor. And one of the things that they really, really emphasized in our marriage group was we couldn't let our kids come in between us.
Yeah.
And that we had to put our marriage above our kids. We had to put our marriage above everything else. Otherwise, if we would have, if we would have both put our kids first, our marriage would have crumbled and we wouldn't even have a marriage.
Yes.
And so they told us, regardless of what happens, your marriage has to be number one under God.
Yeah.
And then if your marriage survives, then everything else will eventually, God will take care of the rest, but you have to protect your marriage.
Yeah.
And once we did that too, our kids realized that we will respect each other first. Just as God designed a family unit too. And then your kids have to respect your spouse, regardless of being biological or a step parent. Like we love them both and we were there to provide for them. And we got through it.
I think that was like the hard thing because I came into this relationship with Christian, and I think Christian was like about 4 years old when me and Paul started dating, 4 or 5. And so, especially coming from a Hispanic background, the one thing that we are always taught is like your kids come first. Kids are number one, guys come and go, especially the heritage of the women in my family, is that we didn't take any shenanigans from any man. We don't put up with it. We put our kids first. Men come and go. And so that was honestly, I don't even know. I mean, obviously it came from the Holy Spirit and I didn't even know it, but just that thought process came to me right away when I met Paul is I saw a lot of women that would place their kids first. And then there was a lot of strife and division in their marriage. And somehow, some way, like I can't even tell you how, but I just knew I had to put our marriage first. And so my number one rule, like for my son, was like, you have to respect him, honor him, obey him. But for Paul, I was like, listen, I don't know, like he didn't have any kids, and so I'm like, I don't know where you are with all of this, but first of all, I need to know that you love my son. And I'm not going to be one of those moms where you're like, you can't discipline my son. You can't tell my son what to do. I'm not going to be like that. I said, however, I first have to see that you love him. If I could see that you love him and you're loving on him, then you can discipline him. And those were kind of my rules for him at first. I'm like, until I could trust you, that you're on his team, on our team, and that you're well-meaning, then you can't discipline him. Because when I came into their family, they did a lot of yelling. And me and Christian, we're very similar. Me and my son, we're very logical people. We talk to each other. It was always very calm, very peaceful. We could have like these really deep conversations even at such a young age. And so then we come into Paul's family and it was total chaos, like everybody's running around, jumping around. Kids are like up and down. Like,
You're like, why are you yelling? We're like, we're not
yes,
yelling.
yes. It was like, oh, hey.
We had our own form of communication.
Yeah.
Yep.
And me and Christian were just standing there like so scared. And I'm like, don't leave my side. And so we had a lot of getting used to.
Yeah.
And so the amazing thing about kids is they're so resilient, and he just like jumped in and got along with his cousins right away and they welcomed him. I don't think it was very welcoming at first, but eventually he earned it. And so
I even tell that to Jess now. I'm like, she's like, why are you always yelling? I'm like, I'm Mexican. This is
Yeah.
how we talk.
That's the way we talk. Yeah.
You're just loud.
so loud. Yeah. And so that was like, Paul would be like, oh, hey, and I'm just like, and Christian's eyes would just like tear up. And I'm like, don't yell at my son
I'm
like
sorry,
that.
I
You
was
could
just
talk to
talking
him.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, buddy. he
Yeah.
looked like that little Puss in Boots.
With the,
Big eyes.
Big
Yeah.
old eyes. 'Cause he has big old eyes. He'd be like, I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Sorry for yelling. Sorry, son, for all those years. I got a lot of sorrying to say. Sorry, everybody.
what it was having your son too, was his dad still in the picture?
No, his dad was, I think the last time we saw something of him, I want to say Christian was maybe 1 or 2.
Oh.
And so, his dad was a drug dealer in and out of jail. And so at the time it was like super hurtful for me because when I basically just didn't want to be with him anymore, like he just cut us all off and he didn't want anything to do with him either. And so, I would always try to reach out to him just for the sake of my son because I had a lot of abandonment and rejection issues. And so I didn't want my son to go through the same thing. And so I would really just humble myself and put myself out there and just reach out to him, like just wanting him to have a relationship with him. And I was so hurt about it back then, but now I really see it was a blessing in disguise because that was not a very good influence for him. And so on the positive note is we didn't really have to deal with that, of another parent making our lives hell, we didn't really have to share him or anything like that.
Yeah. But on the flip side of it too, for those people that don't have their kids in their life and do want their children in their lives, don't stop fighting for it. Because I have a friend.
Yeah.
I have a friend that he wants his daughter back in his life, and she doesn't let him see her. And so it's one of those things too. Don't stop fighting because I've seen that with Gabby here. Is her father rejected her. She, her dad remarried, had kids, went back to Mexico, went and lived a whole nother life, and put her to the back burner, and then reaches out just a few years ago, right? All these years later, and I see that rejection in her. So I'm just saying this, and I've seen it with my nephews. And if you do have a child out there, and you feel that if you're a man of God or a woman of God, don't give up.
Right.
Keep the pursuit because that song, Reckless Love of God, right?
Yeah.
Man, he'll kick down any door. He'll do, that song's so powerful because I know if something happened to my baby, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. I'll kill 1,000 men. It doesn't matter, right? That's how much
And
we love them.
just to know that somebody's fighting for you, right?
Yeah.
I went through so much abuse in my household that I always wished that my dad would just make an attempt, to come rescue me, from everything that I was going through. And even if he was unsuccessful, but just to know that he had been trying would have just been so healing for me, And so, if there's any parents out there, just don't give up on your kids. Just keep trying, and don't be afraid, don't be ashamed. Just all you could do is dust yourself off and just move forward. Yeah.
And then too with that, for those who are watching, if your parents aren't available or around, or if you didn't grow up in the best situation, remember we there's a point that every person has to be responsible for themselves, their own emotions and their own healing. And we never want to give the person who hurt us the power to make us whole. And if they're the ones that broke us, we never want to make them the ones responsible to put us back together. And so we want to be able to understand forgiveness and how to forgive those people, because a lot of times people will never be different than who they've showed themselves to be.
Right.
And one of the things, like I remember when I was learning how to forgive people, so they brought up a story, my mentor, and he said, can you trust a horse thief? And I said, no. And he goes, you can trust a horse thief. And I said, how can you trust a thief? He said, you can trust that he's going to steal your horse. And he said, but what if you guys have been friends for 20 years? You guys both get your horses, go out to a field to go camping. You go to sleep, you wake up, your friend's gone, your horses are gone. Now you're upset. Why are you upset? And because you didn't think he would do it to you? Well, wait a minute. You knew he was a horse thief.
Right.
He goes, you're deceiving yourself
Right.
by thinking someone will be different than who they've displayed themselves to be.
Yes.
And so he says, when you understand that, he goes, it's easier to forgive others because then you're not going to put a different label on them than who they really are. And when they act out of who they are, it's you know that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Like you say liars shouldn't lie. Well, why not? They're liars.
Yeah.
Right.
And if they lie to me, should I be upset because they've displayed themselves as liars? You know, so it comes back to evaluating the situations, and personal healing begins with understanding I have to be responsible for me.
Yes.
And I remember too, you know, I in one of my classes, I at school, it was in psychology, and they talked about the family units, and they said half of it is environmental, and half of it is genetics, right? And they say you could have a family, and they are a great, wonderful family, and they have 2 kids. Everything's great. One becomes a murderer, one becomes rich. And they're like, well, what happened? Yeah. They both were treated exactly the same. But then you have another family that's in poverty, drugs, all this different, horrible stuff, same situation, 2 kids. One becomes a good person, one becomes, goes to prison. So then it goes to, if I want my life to be different, I have to take responsibility and say, how do I want to live, and how do I want to feel?
Yes.
And so
I think that was what one of my transformational moments is. Like I said, I had so much abuse in my household, and so there was just things that would happen in my house, and so I just remember asking. And I mean, there's no dishonor to my mother. These are just, facts, and we're being super transparent to be able to help people. And my mom did the best that she could. She had her own issues, growing up. But I just remember asking her one time, how could you do these things to me? Like, why did you do them? And her response to me at the time was like, you don't have any kids. I was super young. She's like, you don't have any kids. You don't understand. You don't know what you're talking about. And so I just left it at that. And so I ended up, pregnant pretty young. I had my son pregnant at 16. I had him at 17. And I just remember asking her one day too, again, and I was just like, well, now I have my son, and I still can't imagine doing the things to my son that I went through, and I'm like, back to the same question, like, how could you do those things to me? And her response to me was, well, my mother did them to me, and so I did them to you.
Yeah.
And at that moment, and I wasn't a Christian, I didn't really know God, but something just shifted in me. And I'm like, how dumb is it to know the pain because you experienced it yourself? And how dumb is it just to keep on repeating the same pattern? And at that moment, I decided I'm shifting and I'm changing, and I'm not going to be anything like my family. And little by little, it started shifting. And I just remember I was still young, so I had my own place. I was going to school. I had my son. So I was like super stressed, super frustrated, a lot of responsibility at such a young age. And I just remember one day I was just so stressed out. And Christian was so little at the time, and he did something really dumb. And I just remember this rage came over me. And now, mind you, because I was so young, they made me take parenting classes in high school. And thank God for that, where I come from, all of the Hispanic, Mexican people, we were like the broke people, the hood people, and the white people were a little bit better off. So I always told myself I want to be like the white people. But how God can use anything, right? Because that was just the thought process that I was able to capture at the time that God used, because I didn't really have any knowledge of the word or any other evidence of goodness in my life. And so I was like, I'm going to be like the white people. And so my teacher had told me one day in class, if you're ever super frustrated, your kid's crying, that's okay. Just put your kid in a safe place, walk away, and go count to 10. And I heard my mother's voice when she said that, like, what stupid advice to give, that is just dumb. Like, I'm going to go count to 10. Yeah, like that's going to help. And so, but it stayed with me. And so this day that I was like super frustrated with my son, I just remember this rage coming over me, and I just wanted to get him and just shred him to pieces. And the thought came, of course, now I know as a Holy Spirit, I didn't know it back then. This is what your mother experienced, and this is what she had to go through. And that's what happened where the abuse started kicking in. Now you have a choice whether if you want to continue the same cycle, or are you actually going to break the cycle like you said you would. Yeah. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go be like my white teacher and go count to 10.
Breaking the cycle is so important when you have those toxic things that maybe came from growing up, or that you see from like whatever the surroundings, but to make that shift, to make that change is like generational impact, I think we've definitely seen that in our marriage and growing up and stuff too, is you have to make that shift. You have to make that change in order for a different outcome for your family, and your kids.
And even if you don't know God, right, God will make a way in every situation in your life. We just have to keep our eyes open to those choices that we have in every single situation.
Absolutely.
It was a conversation that we had with you guys not too long ago where you were talking about honoring your parents, and it sparked something in me that was I actually was meditating on it and praying on it, and then I went to the commandments and it said to honor your mother and father, and it'll be well with you and you'll live long on the earth. And I remember after a couple of days, probably like a week, I think, I called my mom, and I had thought of that too, all the mistakes that they've done, all the things that's happened. I was like, there's nothing you can do to make that right. There's nothing you can do to fix that. So I called her and I said, hey Mom, I never want you to ever feel bad for all the things that's ever happened. We've all made mistakes, and there's no reason to bring those things back up. I want you to be honored, and I want you to know that everything in my life has developed me to be the person that I am today. Yes. And I want you to know that I love you. And it was pretty cool. Yeah. But I was if I could get a hold of my dad, I'd love to talk to my dad about that. But I still, even though I haven't talked to my dad in quite some time, I still honor,
And it's so important for them to hear that. And we don't realize it, because I thought I had maybe made it clear to my mom that I had forgiven her and everything was well. And one day we were having a conversation and it was brought up to where I was like, no, Mom, like, I'm good. I'm not upset with you anymore. Like, I've forgiven you. And she cried and she was just like, oh my gosh, like I thought this whole time, like you hated me, you were upset with me. And I was just like, wow. And how she just needed to hear, that everything was okay and I wasn't angry with her and I didn't have unforgiveness to her, towards her. That was another freeing moment for me because it was something that I had I didn't know what forgiveness looked like, right? And I would just always ask God, like, how do I know that I have forgiven her? Because sometimes like those memories still creep up, the hurt still creeps up, and you're like, but I already forgave her, and like, why is this still happening? And how do I know it's done? And so the one thought that God gave me one day was, if you can love your mother just the way that she is, without any expectations of her ever changing, ever apologizing for anything, or ever, expecting anything in return, and just love her just the way that she is, then that's how you know you have forgiven her. And that was so freeing to me. And that talking about expectations, that was like so life-changing to release myself and people of any kind of expectations. There's always hope, right? Like we're always praying, we're always hoping, and that's always good to have, but not expecting anything from people. They have free will, they have free choices, and then we can't get disappointed,
Right.
I have a little different take on that
Yeah?
one because I expect my wife to be faithful to me, and
Yes,
and
that's true.
and
Yeah.
Of course.
I expect my
Yes,
kids to
no.
come home at night,
Yeah, yeah.
So the way I look at it is if they're unmet expectations,
Right.
how do I handle it, and do I handle it in a healthy way? Like I remember I told that to one of my mentors because I was in a recovery meeting, and they're talking about not having expectations, and then my mentor told me, he goes, really? He goes, do you? And then he started, and then as he laid all this stuff out, he's like, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have an expectation. It's if that expectation is unmet, do you not handle it correctly? And he says, so how do you handle unmet expectations? And then he gave a scenario.
Yeah.
And he goes, so say your boss does this at work, and you get all upset, and then I call him, and I can't believe this guy did this, da 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 da. And he goes, yeah, he was wrong. You should forgive him. What? Yeah, he was wrong. You should forgive him. And then he goes, or yeah, he did this. Yeah, you were wrong. You should forgive him. And it's like, so just because I expected him to be different, regardless of the situation, how I evaluate it and how I look at it. And I think one thing that I learned too is every person sees the same situation a different way. So, so the way I look at my parents, the way that I look at life and every situation that I'm involved with through the lens that I have, I see it completely different than someone else.
Yes.
And the narration that I give myself could be completely different than the way Jess sees it, or a friend sees it.
Yeah.
And so, like I heard one guy say, there's the left side, the right side, and there's the middle. And it, there's your side, my side, and the
And
the
then
right.
God's truth.
Yeah, and then there's
Right.
the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes the ability to be humble and say, okay, is there a different way to look at this situation than the way that I've said it to myself over the last few years?
Yeah. I think for me, it's not so much, I still, I guess going back to like the expectations, I don't want to expect, anything out of anybody just because going back, they have free will. But I am a big believer of boundaries.
Yeah.
I believe in having boundaries. And so I think that is my way of not trying to control or expect anything out of everybody or anybody, because, I can't control them. I can't make him be faithful to me. But there is a fine boundary line where I've made it very
Like
clear.
consequences.
Yes.
Like, hey, if this happens.
If this happens, I will forgive you because, I want the Lord to forgive me, but we're not going to be together.
Yeah.
There's
There's a shotgun in the room, and I'm not guaranteeing the bullet's not coming your way, but I'll pray for you.
Yes. and I mean, maybe the Lord needs to work on me a little bit more on that, but
No, you're ghetto.
yeah, little head comes out. He's been karate chopped a few times.
Yeah, she's hood.
Karate chop to the neck.
Yeah.
She's hood.
Yeah. So I'm very big on boundaries, and I think that's just my way of just being like, this is all I could do for myself, what I can control. These are the choices that I can make. But if you cross these boundaries, there's going to be consequences, whether if I detach myself emotionally, distance myself, or, whatever it is that the Lord allows me to place as a consequence, or I'll cut you.
Right. In my sleep.
Carrying the razor blade.
Yeah. Yeah, I do sleep in another room, just so you guys know.
No, he
I'm
does
just kidding.
not.
I'm just kidding.
No, he does not. But the Lord sometimes really, it's amazing when you're in the Lord, the things that you're able to forgive, right, and get through. Because there's been so many times back in the past that I would be like, I would never put up with that. I will never allow somebody to treat me like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, 20 years later, I put up with everything I said I wouldn't, and we're here, we have forgiven each other, and we're still working on a lot of things, because it was for so many years. And this is like, honestly, something recent. The Lord brought us here to Arizona from New Mexico. And I really think it was a God thing. I don't think our marriage would have survived out there. And so we came here, and honestly, like right before he met you, he did like a total 180 transformation. We were on the verge of divorcing. I think that was like the closest that I have ever been to leaving, walking out the door. And it's crazy because during that time, there was somebody that popped up from back from home that had kind of seen me struggling in our marriage for so many years. It was very evident, and there were so many people that knew, at church and at home. Like, I was by myself a lot of the times. He was, out doing crazy stuff, and so I was always alone. Birthday parties sometimes for my kids, church events. It was always just me by myself, and he was out, doing crazy stuff. And so somebody had popped up in my life, and so I was like, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm tired of this. I'm out. And there was some stuff that I had found on his phone, and I was like, that's it for me. Like, this is my way out, because I tried everything. With all the abuse and some infidelity, I was like, that's it. I want out. And so then I had this person come up, and we had been talking a little bit about ministry and some of like what I do, the inner healing and deliverance. And so we were talking on that. And then all of a sudden, it was like during Christmas time too. And I struggle a lot with some holidays sometimes, just because of the way that I grew up and a lot of the abandonment that I went through. And over the years, it didn't really help, at home with the issues that we had in our marriage. And so he was planning on leaving me here and going back home for Christmas. And I was so hurt. I was like so devastated. And it just like reopened all of my abandonment, all my rejection wounds. And then here comes this guy, and I'm like venting to him, and I'm like bawling my eyes out. It was just like so perfect, like just the way everything just happened. And then he just like shot his shot, and he's like promising me the moon and the stars. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is everything that I ever wanted to hear from my husband. And my husband's never told me any of this, This is nothing I've ever heard from my husband. And even if they're just words, at least this guy's telling me these words, and nothing that I've ever heard, from my husband. And so if I was already wanting to leave, that just made me want to leave even more. And I'm like, this gives me a clear visual that my husband, he's not the only man out there. There's more men out there, and I'm, because of the ministry that I do, and I'm very analytical, I was just like, I'm not going to just go off of emotion, and I'm not just going to leave my husband for this man. But it was very enticing, and I'm like, I want to make sure that if I leave him, it's because it was something I wanted to do. It was because, of all of this stuff that I'm finding on his phone, and not because there was somebody else. And so his attitude was he was just so angry, and I'm just like checked out at that point. And I'm just like, I just don't want to be in this marriage anymore. And so I was pretty much checked out. I was already looking for places to move to, and had already talked to my daughter, and I was like, we're going to move out. I mean, it was just right there. And something just inside of me was just like, just talk to him this one last time. Just let him know what's going on, and let's see what happens, And so I told him everything. I told him, what this guy had been telling me, that I had been talking to this guy, and that I was, already thinking about leaving, and this just made me want to leave more. And I didn't expect the reaction that I got from him that day, because I thought it was just going to be the same old Paul, super angry, blowing up, never taking any responsibility for his actions, never taking any accountability. And so it was different this time. And I think he knew this time it was,
at that point.
I was already out the door. And so he changed that day, like did a 180. And I had never seen that for the first time in my marriage. Like, you know, I felt heard, I felt validated, you know, and I think that's super important for women is we just want to feel secure. We want to feel safe. We want to feel heard, you know, not always like he does. And sometimes I have to tell him, I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to hear me. Yeah. Just listen to me. And it was like the very first time ever that I felt that. And it, just like that, everything just switched around, you know, and we're still together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. Yeah, and that just gives a testimony to marriages out there that if you guys are fighting, there's someone watching from the outside.
Oh yeah.
That's waiting for their opportunity to swoop in.
Yeah.
And so,
Yep.
especially for women, I mean, for every one woman that walks out the door, there's about 100 guys ready to talk to her. And so,
Well, the hard thing with me is I've had 6 men come up to me and told me that they're in love with my wife, and this is.
I don't think in love. They just love me because
Because
you're
love each
lovable.
other. Yes.
You know who you are. No,
Stand back.
I've had guys tell me that, and I'm like, no, you don't. You're not in love with her. You love the Jesus in her. And when she told me all that stuff, I'm not gonna lie. Like I was like, right away, I'm like, who is this freaking jabroni? I'm gonna kill him. And I had to let it go the other day. So whoever you are, don't worry about it. I'm not gonna kill you because I don't know who you are. But we were at a marriage conference the other day, and she asked me that. She's all, what did you write down on that piece of paper? And I said, I had to let it go because if my friends know me, you know what I mean? I'll drive down there and break this dude's neck. You know what I mean?
Alligators gotta eat.
Yeah, I don't know who he is. You know what I mean? And I'm being real calm right now, but it's like something in a man festers in you, you know, and it's like, and I had to let it go. I was like, okay, God, I have to let it go because she forgave me for a lot of stuff, you know, and that's the whole thing. When we go back to, because I know there's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of men that me and you minister to and we talk to, and you can't give them advice unless you've been through it. And I have, you know who you are, my friends out there, and going back to this, because you guys lived together before you got married. We lived together before we got married, and you guys know who you are living together and are not married and serving in the church and going through the motions, you know, and I did that for so many years. And like she said, I had to do the 180, and that's where I'm calling you guys out as men. Like Pastor Michael said today, I'm going to have to talk your language, and you're going to have to make the transformation and turn around for yourself. It took my wife almost leaving me for another man in a church that built a relationship with her. And I talked to the guys the other day at Teen Challenge, and I was like, there's predators out there in the church. And how many of us sat in that church as a predator? Okay, there's predators and there's prey. I said, so if you're in a relationship right now, and I just feel this is for the women, stop pestering your men to get married. Okay? Stop pestering him. All right? If you want out, it's your turn to get out. You could leave because you're not married to him. She came to me that day vulnerable, and I knew it. That was the most transparent and real she's ever been with me because we weren't fighting. We were talking. Okay? She didn't come at me like, I'm effing leaving you and blah, 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 blah. You know, like in the past, like, you know, and I would just laugh. I'd be like, okay, here she goes again. And I'd just go lay down. This time it was real. Yeah. And I knew it was real. I was like, oh my God, there's somebody else that wants my wife. Like, you know, that's trying to take my wife to woo her away. And I think that's the way God designed us, because he said he created us in his image and his likeness. So for me, with that intimacy with my wife, if me and Jacob aren't having that intimacy with the Lord, how do I expect that intimacy with my wife? Because what you're talking about before this podcast began, we're the mirror, right?
Yeah.
We're the mirror of each other. So she always tells me I'm only a reflection of your leadership, and my leadership's been very bad. And all my friends will tell you I was a bad, bad man. I'm no bueno, you know. And that day when she told me all that stuff, I really believe she was going to leave me. And it scared me because I was like, okay, now it's like, wow, it just got real. So all of you guys out there right now, if you're in a toxic relationship and you want out and you're not married, get out of it. Leave him, leave her. But if you're married, go get help, seek help. There's couples like us that have been there, that have gone through it. We've been through some dirt. I mean, like dirt, drugs, alcohol, everything, like the whole thing, abuse. We could, I joke about it a little bit right now, but I backhanded her on Cinco de Mayo. She's Mexican. I hit her on her own holiday, man. Right? You know what I mean? And we had to go to counseling for all that. And
we had to go through 5 counselors. We were just that difficult to deal with.
so I'm going to give out Pastor John, if you're watching this, thank you, because our last counselor, Pastor John, from Legacy Church in Albuquerque, he was the most real. He helped us.
Yeah.
And that's definitely needed.
Absolutely.
Definitely needed. And you said something that's important too. You guys went to 5 counselors.
Yes.
That's showing that you weren't giving up on the marriage, and sometimes we need to continue to seek. What does the Bible say? If you ask, you'll find. If you seek, or no, if you ask, you'll receive. If you seek, you'll find, and if you knock, the door will be open. And so you gotta continue to fight for the marriage.
Yes.
And that's based on the love that Christ has for us. We don't want to give up on our marriage.
That's right. It's worth fighting for.
Yeah. And really taking help and direction, no matter where you're at, right? Just because maybe you saw a functional relationship or, it could be different, because that was a little bit more difficult for him to receive, I think, direction, because his parents were still married. And so he just thought this is just the way it's supposed to be. But I didn't like the dynamic in his parents' marriage. And so I came from a super broken place. And so I knew I was all sorts of messed up. I'm like, I need help. Like, I need a lot of help. And so he was a little bit more resistant to it. But man, there's like so much help out there.
Absolutely.
There's books. I read so many good books, and it taught me so much, especially not being raised by a man. Like, I didn't know men had a nothing box. I would just be like,
you
what
got
are
to
you
be thinking about something.
Exactly. I'm like, what are you thinking about? Nothing. I'm like, you cannot not think about something.
Right.
There's always something in your brain. And he's just like, no.
The book she's referring to is for men only and for women only.
That was such a helpful book.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you, I'm not a reader, so if I told you I read a book, I'm lying to you. I listened to it.
There you go. Audiobook. Yep.
Audio, and she put it on CD back in the old days. We had CDs, and she put it in my truck. I think it was like 6 CDs or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, and then I listened to it, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I understand a woman's mind now.
Yeah.
I'll put a link in the description too. There's a video called "Laugh Your Way to a Happy Marriage"
Oh, yeah.
We
It's
watched
good.
that.
by Mark
Yes.
Gungor.
So
Oh
good.
my
Awesome.
gosh, that's a great video. Well, we're over an hour now, and so guys, we want to before we end, just want to let everyone know that's watching, there is help. Don't not get help, and get connected with a marriage group, with other people that are doing life the way that you want life to be done. So you want to get around people that are going in the same direction that godly marriages are going, and you become what is it? The most five closest people to you. You become part of that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so if you're not happy with your lifestyle, you got to get away from the people that you're
Change it,
around
yes.
and get around the people that are living the way that you want to live.
Yep.
So get part of a marriage group, get a counselor if you need a counselor, and just like you guys are saying, you went through 5. Don't stop until you get a good godly counselor.
Absolutely.
And
don't settle, right, for
Yeah.
the way things are. Don't
Yeah.
allow abuse to continue to happen in your household. That's not okay. It's not okay for your kids to watch. Get help. I think that's when things started to really shift, is when we started reaching out for help.
Yeah.
there it is.
Never be afraid to do that.
Well, guys, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and you'll see when the next video drops.
Roger
All right.
that.
Later, guys.
Bye.